Okay, welcome back to the International Relations and Cooperation course. And in this lecture, we're going to focus on some pathways to interstate peace. The first topic is international law and institutions as mechanisms for peace. So the idea of using international law and institutions as mechanisms for peace has been a long-standing aspiration around the globe. So here is a brief analysis. So first, the nature and evolution of international law. International law can be defined as essentially a set of rules, norms, and standards that govern relations between states. It is more flexible and also less formal than domestic law. And as far as the historical roots, we see examples as far back as the 17th century. So efforts like the Treaty of Westphalia and also contributions by various scholars have laid the foundation for international law as it exists and as we understand it today. So the main differences between domestic and international law: first, the scope is different. So while domestic law pertains to individuals within a country, international law primarily targets states. However, exceptions do exist. For example, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, does recognize individual accountability for crimes against humanity. And there are a few examples in history about this. Also, the enforcement is different. Domestic laws are enforceable by dedicated mechanisms like police and courts. In contrast, international law relies on collective state actions. One example is sanctions, and these are used for enforcement, but are often non-binding or always non-binding. One good case in point is the law of the Sea Treaty, highlighting the evolving nature of international law. This treaty is a modern replacement for the dated Freedom of the Seas principle. It addresses maritime rights, exclusive economic zones, and others. So despite its wide acceptance, the treaty faces challenges. And the territorial disputes in the South China Sea are one good example of this. So in conclusion, international law and institutions, although not as binding as domestic laws, offer a framework for states to interact in a more predictable and peaceful manner. So while challenges exist, especially with enforcement, these systems remain crucial in fostering global cooperation and peace. The future of international peace will heavily depend on the extent to which states are willing to prioritize collective good over narrow interests and uphold the principles of international law. So next, we're going to talk about the United Nations. So after the failures of the League of Nations, the world sought to create another system to maintain international peace. World War II's atrocities gave further impetus to creation of an improved and more comprehensive international organization, and this was the United Nations. So the United Nations, or the UN, was founded in 1945 after the war, with its charter laying the foundation for its goals, principles, and mechanisms. Unlike the League of Nations, the UN has near universal membership today, and as of 2023, there were 193 member states. One of the most significant differences between the League and the United Nations is the Security Council, where 5 permanent members, China, France, Russia, the UK, and the USA hold veto power. So the Security Council is responsible for international peace and security. While the veto power can hinder decisive actions, it was included to ensure that the major powers remain within the UN system rather than operate outside it. So despite its numerous successes, such as peacekeeping missions and also humanitarian efforts, the UN has faced criticism for its failures in preventing certain wars or genocides, particularly when Security Council members have conflicting interests. So, looking at the United Nations from a liberal perspective and also a realist perspective, we'll start with the liberal view. So, the normative framework. In terms of the normative framework, the UN is essential in establishing an international normative framework, and through its various charters and resolutions, the UN provides a collective voice for global aspirations such as peace, development, and human rights. Also, the UN offers a platform for dialogue, negotiation, and collaboration, and it enables states to cooperate on shared challenges from climate change to counterterrorism. So, as highlighted by scholars, peacekeeping missions are instrumental in ensuring the longevity of peace after conflicts. UN interventions reduce the risk of war recurrence and also help maintain stability. Also, the UN gives representation to the developing world, allowing smaller and weaker states to voice their concerns on an international stage. Moving to the realist view on the UN, so first, the UN's effectiveness is constrained by the realities of power politics. The Security Council's structure, especially the veto power of its permanent members, can interfere with collective action. Also, without its own military, the UN relies on member states for peacekeeping forces. This dependence can lead to selective enforcement of resolutions or limited intervention capabilities. Also, states primarily act based on their national interest. Again, we're looking at the realist view. So while they might cooperate in the UN framework, they often prioritize their own security and strategic interests. And finally, the Cold War era exemplified the limitations of the UN, with major powers often in deadlock. They couldn't make decisions. And this often led to the UN being sidelined in favor of regional security arrangements or bilateral agreements. So in sum, while liberals view the UN as a vital institution that fosters cooperation and upholds international norms, realists are more skeptical, emphasizing the constraints posed by power dynamics and national self-interest. Both perspectives acknowledge the complex role of the UN in the international system, but they diverge on its potential and limitations in maintaining global peace and security. So next, we'll take a look at the European Union. So the European Union, or EU, represents a unique approach to international peace, focusing on regional integration. Beginning as the European Coal and Steel Community in the 1950s, the EU aimed to make war between France and Germany materially impossible by integrating their economies. This integration expanded, leading to the creation of the European Economic Community and eventually the European Union. The EU today comprises or includes 27 member countries, after the UK's Brexit in 2020, and it has become one of the world's largest economies. It functions through a complex system of institutions, including the European Commission, the Council of the European Union, and the European Parliament. The EU's integration has been credited with fostering peace on a continent that saw 2 world wars. However, it has also faced challenges, such as economic disparities among the members, and also debates over sovereignty, and also rising nationalism. Despite these challenges, the EU exemplifies how economic and political integration can foster regional peace and cooperation. Its approach has inspired other regions, although none have achieved the same level of integration. So, going a little bit deeper on the EU and the rule of law and institutions, the European Union represents one of the most significant and ambitious undertakings in the history of international relations. Its development, as described, offers invaluable insights into the role of international law, institutions, and multilateralism in promoting peace and stability. The EU's foundation in the economic realm with the European coal and steel community was strategic. So by intertwining the economies of traditional adversaries like France and Germany, the rationale was to make war not just unthinkable, but materially unviable. Also, the progression from an economic community to a political union underscores the EU's adaptive nature. So the establishment of the European Parliament, Court of Justice, and the European Commission signifies the deepening of ties and shared governance mechanisms among member states. Also, the EU emphasizes governance through the rule of law. This adherence ensures that disputes between member states are settled through legal and institutional channels rather than coercive means. This helps to promote long-term peace. And then the EU's enlargement policy, particularly its eastward expansion after the Cold War, showcased its soft power by offering membership to states from the former Soviet bloc. The EU not only spread its values, but also ensured peace by integrating them into its framework. So, like all complex institutions, the EU faces challenges. The Eurozone crisis revealed structural economic issues and tensions among member states. However, the EU's resilience in the face of these challenges underlines its foundational strength and the commitment of its members to the project. Also, the EU experience highlights that various peace mechanisms can coexist. While the EU promotes peace through integration and rule of law, NATO ensures the defense and security of many European nations through a balance of power approach, like we've talked about in the previous lecture. Also, the post-World War II order, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, incorporated elements of balance of power, hegemony, and international rules and institutions. The EU's experience can be seen as a microcosm of this larger order. The EU's achievements and challenges offer lessons for other regional organizations and for global governance as a whole. So in conclusion, the EU serves as a testament to the potential of international law and institutions in fostering peace, While challenges persist, the continuous evolution of the EU showcases the adaptability and strength of a system built on shared values, cooperation, and the rule of law.